Hi, I'm Paul Roby, lead pastor here at South Mountain Community Church, and I just want to say thank you for tuning in to one of our messages today. I hope that you'll find these messages to be both hopeful and helpful. And we also hope that you will just simply use these messages to supplement your own spiritual growth. These are not meant to be a replacement for your own local church. Having said that, I just want to say, if you would like to contribute to the ministry of SMCC and help us provide more resources for more people, we would really appreciate that. Just click the Give button at the bottom of the page.
I'm Eric. If we haven't met, I get to serve SMCC as one of the teaching pastors here. And back in September, I had the privilege of kicking off this series with you, Gospelish. And today, I get to bring this series home. I get to bring it to its conclusion. And I want to kick off today with a series of questions. And these questions, they might be easy for you, but just so you know, these questions are very difficult for some. And so here we go. Here's the first question I want to ask you. They're on the screen behind me. Should a Christian take their kids to Disneyland? Last time I checked, a one-day ticket to Disney is going to cost you $100. All right? Should a Christian take their kids to Disney? Easy question. Here's the next question. It's behind me on the screen. Should a Christian go out to eat at the Melting Pot? You know, should a Christian eat at the Melting Pot? Because last time I was there, it cost me more than a day at Disney. Okay, that's just how the Melting Pot works. These are maybe easy for you. Let's go to another one. Should a Christian have granite in their kitchen? And the answer to this, of course, is no. It should be quartz. We all know that. One more question. Should a Christian drive a Tesla or some other luxurious automobile? All right? And we could put all these together, in fact. Should a Christian leave their luxurious granite kitchen and their luxurious automobile, a Tesla, on their way to a luxurious vacation at Disneyland while stopping to eat at a luxurious restaurant like the Melting Pot? Should a Christian do that? And some of you are like confused right now, and you're like, where is he going with this? It feels like he's setting me up for something. And I am. This might feel like a test to some of you, but come on, should a Christian do those things? And I want to put a picture on the screen next, and I'm going to put a picture on the screen, and let me know if this picture might change your answer to those four questions. Take a look at this. After seeing this, Jesus followers in the room, Christians in the room who are called to be generous, do you still think that trip to Disney is for you after seeing this? Knowing that this is going on in the world, do you still think you should splurge on that meal, that fancy restaurant downtown? After seeing this, knowing that this is going on in the world, and knowing that you can do something about it, are you sure you want to upgrade your automobile? Now, listen. This is so important. The emotion that I just forced you to feel, the emotion that I am right now exploiting and manipulating all across this room, that emotion is the emotion that today's Gospelish thrives on. Today's Gospelish is fueled by the emotion that has caused the awkward silence across this entire room. Today, I want to talk to you about one more Gospelish, and it's this: the poverty gospel. I want to talk to you about the poverty gospel. Now, everybody, do me a favor, take a deep breath. Relax. Today will not get any more intense than what I just put you through, but I put you through that to make a point and to help you feel what the poverty gospel loves to make people feel. Now, if you haven't been here with us, this is a series called Gospelish. And over the last 5 weeks, we've been talking about what happens when you add ISH to the end of a word. And when you add ISH to the end of a word, you shift that word, you tweak that word, you change that word. Today's service started at 10:15. Some of you got here at 10:15-ish, okay? You know how this works. Whenever we add ISH to a word, we tweak it, we change it, we twist it. And we've been talking about in this series what happens when you add ISH to the end of gospel and you create gospel-ish. And we hope that gospel-ish is the newest word in your vocabulary, and we hope this word will stay in your vocabulary for the rest of your life. Gospel-ish is any idea about God that sounds right but isn't, is close to right but isn't, seems accurate but actually is inauthentic. That's what gospel-ish actually is. And today we're talking about the gospel-ish that is the poverty gospel. And my hope today is very simple. I hope to free you from the guilt that I made you feel just a few moments ago. I hope to free us all from that guilt, because that guilt is the type of guilt that preachers of the poverty gospel, churches of the poverty gospel, love to make people feel all the time. And in fact, if you're not a Jesus person, you're not a God person, maybe one of the reasons is connected to the poverty gospel. Because you are so sick and tired of going through guilt trips in church services. And if you've experienced that, I'm so sorry you did. Today is going to be better. Today is going to be different. Today we are talking about a better way forward. And that picture I put on the screen was taken in 1993. It found its way to Time magazine. It was taken by a man named Kevin Carter, who actually took his own life in 1994. And people have said, to the best of our knowledge, that the young girl in that picture did make it to some help. She did get to help. But that picture really shifted the world back in the 90s. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the poverty gospel, I just want to put a few lines on the screen to help you know what it is that the poverty gospel preaches. This is what the poverty gospel preaches. The poverty gospel preaches this: help the poor not be poor, even if it makes you poor. Which I don't know about the logic of all of that, but that's what the poverty gospel preaches. It preaches this: if you have the resources that the world loves, then you must love the world. We're going to talk about that in a bit. The poverty gospel preaches this: the less you have, the more God can do. The poverty gospel preaches this: enjoying nice things is actually a bad thing. And the poverty gospel subtly communicates that the less you have, the more you love God. The less you have, the more God actually loves you. And I tried to find some quotes about the poverty gospel. I just couldn't find any, because this gospel-ish, it is so sneaky. It is so subtle. The poverty gospel romanticizes poverty, but that is a first world problem, because people in poverty do not romanticize it. The poverty gospel heaps the guilt on you for enjoying good things, as if enjoying good things was a bad thing. This is what the poverty gospel does. And ultimately, if you want to write a few things down today, you could write this next point down. The poverty gospel, it uses the poor to shame the rich. And when I put that picture on the screen, I wasn't trying to create compassion for that child. I was using that child to create something in you, to manipulate something in you. Thanks for letting me do that to you, by the way. You didn't know that was coming, but that's what the poverty gospel does. It uses the poor to shame the rich. Now, 2,000 years ago, some of the most influential Jesus followers were wealthy, like very, very wealthy. I mean, so wealthy that in their large homes, groups of people, churches, could meet inside of their large homes. And they were incredibly generous with their wealth. And to this day, wealthy Jesus followers are some of the most generous people I have ever met. And the New Testament writes to these people, and it does not shame these people for their wealth. It doesn't guilt them for their wealth. It talks honestly about that wealth and talks about how they can handle that wealth. And in the first century, there was a leader named Paul, and he wrote to a young leader named Timothy. Timothy had a church that he was leading, and inside of that church, inside of that community, there were wealthy people. And Paul writes to Timothy about how to lead wealthy people. And look at what Paul says. It'll be on the screen behind me. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our, look at this word, enjoyment. He provides things to us for our enjoyment. Verse 18, command them, though, to sell everything they have, right? No, that's not what it says. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. They will invest in what really matters, so that they may take hold of the life that truly matters. That is truly life. He doesn't tell them to get rid of it. He tells them how to use it and how to live with it. And essentially, he says, wealthy people in the church, he says, use it, but don't put your hope in it, and be generous with it. And we're going to come back to all that, but I want to illustrate something for you that's really important about the poverty gospel. Imagine you went to the doctors this week, and your throat was hurting, and you're like, you know what? I think it's strep. I think I got some strep. And so you go to the doctor and they get out that swab test. Have you had that swab test done before? You gag for the next day after they do that. I hate that, And they swab you and they go back and you're like, come on, just give me the medication. So imagine you're there, they do the swab test, they do the strep test, and the doctor comes back in and says, hey, I got some bad news. You have strep. And you're like, yeah, I knew it. Can I just get in and get out, please? What's this bill going to cost me? And you're there and the doctor says, but hey, I have some good news for you. I have some good news for you. You don't have to fight this alone, man. When I went out of the room, just so you know, I gave myself your strep too, and we're going to get through this together, buddy. Come on. You would find yourself a brand new doctor, okay? We don't need people who are willing to take on our plight. We need people who are able and capable to help us in the middle of our plight. People who, because of their wealth of knowledge and their wealth of experience, can help people in need. Guys, that's what we need. And the poverty gospel, it uses the poor to shame the rich, but the real gospel does something completely different. You can write this down. The gospel, it uses wealth. It uses wealth to serve the poor and to serve the rich. The real gospel doesn't want us to feel guilty about what we have, doesn't want us to feel guilty about our money. The gospel invites us to be responsible with it. And this next sentence, it's not on the screen, but it might be worth the price of admission. Listen, money is a terrific servant. It is a horrible master, okay? Money is a terrific servant. It is a horrible master. And so the poverty gospel, it uses the poor to shame the rich, to get something from the rich. The real gospel uses wealth to serve those who are poor and to serve those who are rich. Now, in the 1700s, go back with me. In the 1700s in Ireland, Ireland was gripped. It was in a death grip by addiction and drunkenness. Addiction and drunkenness was so widespread that Ireland was also gripped by poverty, because it's hard to have a culture marked by those two things and not be in poverty. And this was fueled by a couple things. It was fueled by unsafe drinking water and ridiculously cheap gin. You put those two things together, you're going to have some addiction and some drunkenness. And in Ireland, there was a preacher named John Wesley. And John Wesley would stand up on stage each Sunday and he would preach this: earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And one day in the seats, there was a man named Arthur Guinness. Guinness. You know the dark beer that hipsters with beards love? Guinness. And he was there one day, and he heard that message. Earn all you can, give all you can, save all you can. And it changed him. It changed his life forever, and because of that, it changed Ireland too. Because Guinness decided to brew his beer for the glory of God and for the good of Ireland. It was far safer to drink than the water. And it was much more difficult to get drunk on it. Although it was more than 5%, Utah, it was much more difficult to get drunk on. It was one of the most healthy, nutritious beverages in all the land. And of course, because of this, because of this, he had tremendous wealth. I mean, Guinness beer just took off, and he did something with that wealth. He knew that wealth was a horrible master, but a terrific servant. And so he put his wealth to work, and he paid his employees more than anybody else paid their employees. He pioneered paid vacation. Aren't you glad that he did? And he pioneered healthcare for his employees, and he challenged other wealthy business leaders to do the same. And Arthur Guinness put his wealth to work, and he passed this on to his family, and they passed it on through generations. Guys, money to Arthur Guinness, it was not his master. It was his servant, and he used it to serve people. Guys, one of my concerns with the poverty gospel is this, and you could write this down. The poverty gospel taxes our joy. The poverty gospel taxes our joy, and here's how. You give, and you think you're being generous, but then you wonder to yourself, did I give enough? And so then you're racked with guilt over your generosity, not knowing if your generosity was enough. The poverty gospel says you probably should have given more, and in that, it taxes your joy. You're on a vacation, and you're racked with guilt because you could be using that money to do something else. And the poverty gospel says if you really love Jesus, you would have done more with your money, not enjoyed a trip. And so you can't enjoy the vacation because the poverty gospel is taxing your joy. Isn't it ironic that the poverty gospel says give it all away, but the poverty gospel says give something back to me, and that is your joy. Guys, the poverty gospel, it taxes our joy. So where did this come from? I mean, how did people get here where pastors get on stage and say, you should get rid of it and you should sell it and you should give it all away and you're not giving enough and you're not doing enough, and if you love God, you would do more, and if you love God, you would have less? Where did that come from? Well, poverty gospel preachers look to a few things in the Bible, and I think one of the verses they go to is actually a verse I love, but for a very different reason. There's a verse in the New Testament written by a guy named John. John was a very dear friend to Jesus, and he later would write a letter to Jesus' followers. And look at what he says. Here we go, 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. This is the poverty preacher's favorite verse. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. And this is the poverty gospel's hallmark verse. It preaches this: if you have what the world has, you must love what the world loves. And if you love what the world loves, you must not love God. So give up what you have if you want to love God. And it just beats this into people over and over and over again. Guys, that may be true. It may be true that someone has what the world has and love what the world loves, but it might not be true. It might be true, it might be false. The poverty gospel lives in that fuzzy middle. And it just lets the guilt come in if you want. It just lets the guilt slide right in to get more out of people. Guys, you could write this down. The poverty gospel, it does not delight in God. It delights in the amount that someone gives up for God. So in this series, we've talked about a few different gospel issues. We talked about the positivity gospel. We also talked about the prosperity gospel. And the prosperity gospel forces us to try to one-up each other. Well, God gave you that. Well, hey, God gave me this. Oh, God gave you that. Hey, God gave me this. And the prosperity gospel is about leveling up, and some of us are one-uppers. But some of us in the room are one-downers, and the poverty gospel forces us to one-down each other. I gave up my Saturday stacking chairs at church for God. You give up your Saturday? I gave up my vacation. Went on that mission trip, man. I gave more. Oh, you gave up your vacation? I gave up my house and took the equity and gave it to God. Look at that. Hey, one down, you know. I took my 401k and I gave that to God. So there we go. You fill in the blank. Prosperity, one up. Poverty, one down. The problem with both, and the problem with the poverty gospel, is it forces us to compare. And it compares us with people in a way that's not fair. It compares us to a community, and it's just not fair. Because here's the thing. Wherever you go, there's going to be someone that has more than you. And wherever you go, there will always be someone that has less than you. And there will always be someone who gives more than you. And there will always be someone who gives less than you. So which is it? Are you generous? Are you selfish? Or are you selfless? Which one is it? Because if I compare with some people, I look super generous. If I compare with other people, I'm not very generous at all. If I look at some people, I am very selfish. If I look at other people, I'm very selfless. And the poverty gospel forces us to compare our lives with people. And guys, this will put you on a dizzying merry-go-round throughout your life. Which is it? Am I selfless or selfish? Am I generous or not? Guys, I don't know about you, but I want off the merry-go-round that the poverty gospel puts people on. And I bet you do too. And here's the good news. Jesus once told a story, and then he made a point from the story. And the point that Jesus makes frees us from the push and pull that the poverty gospel forces us to experience. And let me show you what Jesus once said. He tells this incredible story, and he gets to the end of it, and he makes the point. And look at what he says. He says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself. Jesus, I can buy my friends? Jesus is like, yeah, go for it if you can. Why not? Yeah, we've never heard that verse before. But what he's saying is when you use wealth to serve people, your service will actually draw you near to people. That's what Jesus is talking about. Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself so that when it is gone, by the way, it will be gone someday, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. How you use your money says where your real home is. Verse 10, he says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Now, there's a lot we could say here that we just don't have time to cover, but here's the point. Jesus is saying this. There will be rich people, and he does not shame those rich people. He talks about how rich people and wealthy people can be trustworthy people. He didn't blast them for their money. He talks about how they can leverage their wealth for kingdom impact. I'd love for you to write this next point down. God is not asking us to trade places with the poor. He's asking us to be trustworthy with our wealth. We don't need to feel guilty about the wealth that we might have. We do need to be responsible with the wealth that we have. To use Jesus' words, trustworthy. Now, the question that might be rattling through your mind, I know it's rattling through mine, is, well, then what does it mean to be trustworthy? What does it mean to be responsible? If Jesus invites me to be trustworthy, to be trusted with the little things, because maybe I could be trusted with bigger things, then what is trustworthiness? Now, here's the thing. Jesus followers, all types of great, loving Jesus followers disagree on what trustworthy and responsible actually means. Some say trustworthy is just about what's in your heart, Just give an amount that you feel is your amount, and if your heart loves it, then God loves it, and just go with it. Go with what's in your heart. And some people say, no. If you're not at 10%, you're not even in the game. Get to 10% and then you're in the game. And other people would say this, hey, just begin to take a next step somewhere and move to 10%. And 10% is full faithfulness. Jesus followers disagree on all that. But can I share with you what I think is trustworthiness? I think Jesus gives us a benchmark in his grace and in his love to protect us from the poverty gospel taxing our joy. I think Jesus gives us a number. He gives us a benchmark to take a next step towards. And that benchmark protects us from the poverty gospel guilting us. And some say a benchmark is legalistic. I say no, it's wise because it's clear. And it cuts through the fuzziness of the poverty gospel so that you can be generous and live with joy without the poverty gospel taking more of your joy from you. And I want to share with you where I think that benchmark comes from. Jesus said this in Luke 11. He says, woe to you Pharisees, these are religious leaders. Woe to you Pharisees, because you give God a tenth, another way to talk about it, a tithe. You give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. So you give this, but you're not doing this. And here's what Jesus says. You should have practiced the latter, the justice and the love, and look at this, without leaving the former undone. Give. How much? A tenth. And do love and justice. That's what Jesus taught here. And then the Apostle Paul would write to his friends in Corinth, and he would say this, don't you know that those who work in the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? He's going back, and he's referencing what happened in the Old Testament, where people who served God, who were leaders, they got their support from people who gave a tenth, okay? And it goes on. Here's the bridge to us today, verse 14. In the same way, the Lord has commanded. The Lord has commanded. In the same way. In what way? In the Old Testament 10th way. The Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. Guys, I'm convinced that Jesus gives us 10% as a benchmark to get to at some point. Not to force you into something, but in love to protect you from the poverty gospel's guilt over you. And if you're not there, maybe you haven't even started, here's the good news. Jesus is full of grace and truth. Take a next step. Pick a percentage, make it a priority, and make it progressive over time. And when you do, you will find joy that is untaxable by the poverty gospel and the guilt trip preaching of certain pastors. So you might be thinking, okay, Eric, I'm with you. I'm tracking with you. I get it. But Eric, I have another question. Back to the Disneyland, the melting pot, my countertops in my kitchen, and my car. Eric, back to all that. Eric, the question I have is this question right here. How do you know when you have too much? When is enough enough? I mean, if I'm going to kind of talk about the poverty gospel and I'm going to talk about my wealth, I mean, when is too much too much? When do I know that I have enough? Well, I want to circle back to what Paul said to Timothy. Remember Timothy from about 20 minutes ago, that young leader with wealthy Christians in his church. I want to circle back to that because I think the answer is right there. Look again at what Paul says to Timothy. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God. Here's my answer to the question. When is too much too much? Here's my answer. It's not about too much. The question, when is too much too much, it's the wrong question. The question should be, when am I too attached? When am I too attached? This is a freeing question. It's not a legalistic question. The question is not, when do I have too much? When is enough enough? The question is, man, am I too attached? So it's not about having too much. It is about being too attached. Now you're like, well, Eric, now I got another question for you. That's all right. I think I have the answer. How do you know when you're too attached? How do I know if I'm too attached to the things that I have, if I'm too attached to what my wealth gives me? How do I know when I'm too attached? I want to give you 3 simple questions. And I can't answer these questions for you. These questions are for you to answer yourself. These are 3 questions about being too attached. Here's the first one. Would I despair if it went away? Would I despair if it went away? If the luxurious automobile went away, could I still have joy because of Jesus? If those trips out to eat went away, would I still have joy because of Jesus? If the 3-car garage went away, would I still have joy because of Jesus? And if that went away and despair would set in, you might be too attached. Here's the second question. Do I regularly give some away? If you do not regularly give some away, you might be too attached, and that's why you don't give some away. And here's the third question. Is my self-worth fixed to my net worth? Is my pursuit for more based on the fact that if I have more, I feel like I am more? If my self-worth is fixed to my net worth, I will be too attached. I will always want to have more. I will not want to give any away. I will want to use what I have to buy more for me because essentially I'm buying more value for myself. So those 3 questions I think are very important questions for you to diagnose, not whether you have too much, but to diagnose whether you are too attached. So as we head towards home in our series, Gospelish, I want to introduce you to just one more topic, and our Gospelish series will be done. When I was in high school, I took Spanish. Raise your hand if you took Spanish in high school. Fantastic. That's great. Here's the thing about me. I didn't learn much Spanish back in high school, Probably because of too much Guinness. Thank you, Arthur Guinness. I didn't learn much Spanish. What I learned, though, was Spanglish, okay? You guys know what Spanglish is. I learned Spanglish, which is where I knew enough to kind of sound like I knew Spanish, but really what I was doing was taking my Spanish and mixing it with English, and now I had Spanglish, all right? I was confident enough to try, but I was nowhere close to write, okay? Listen, when it comes to the gospel, some of us know gospel-ish. We can talk about God, we think we know a little bit about God, and we take it and we kind of mix it and we match it and we come up with something new. It's like Spanglish, but it is gospel-ish. Now, for some people who are fluent in multiple languages, I've heard this incredible thing that they can actually dream in the other language. How is that for fluency? I mean, that is incredible fluency. That's how confident they are in that new language. It's our hope that with this series, you would begin to take a next step towards being so confident in the gospel that it's not gospel-ish for you, but that you become gospel fluent. Could you imagine being gospel fluent for just a moment? Somebody asks you that tough question over coffee, and because you're gospel fluent, you can deliver an answer that's helpful and hopeful, full of grace and truth. Could you imagine if you were gospel fluent after you made a mistake or a failure in your life? And rather than thinking you need to step away from God because God's angry at you, you could preach the gospel to yourself because you were gospel fluent, and you could remind yourself, no, there's nothing I could do to cause God to love me any less or any more. Could you imagine if you were that gospel fluent? You think to yourself, I should really be doing more to prove to God I'm worthy of salvation, and you're so gospel fluent, you go, there's nothing more I could do. Jesus did everything for me. I can simply trust him. Could you imagine if you had that type of gospel fluency? It's our hope that this series is just the beginning of you becoming gospel fluent. And I want to leave you with 4 next steps that you could take. 4 next steps that you could take if you wanted to take a step towards gospel fluency. Here's the first step. Practical teaching. See, when you listen to messages about the gospel, it helps you grow fluent in the gospel. Practical teaching. Here's the second step, personal ministry. When you serve others and you help others understand the gospel, when you teach the gospel to others, when you serve in places around here, it helps you grow gospel fluent. Here's the third step, purposeful relationships. When you get yourself out of a row and into a circle where the gospel is being experienced and the gospel is being lived out, it helps you grow gospel fluent. And here's the fourth, private devotion. What you do when no one's watching, what you do with your money that no one sees, when you trust Jesus in all those ways, you are growing gospel fluent. So out of those 4 next steps, which one might be yours? If you were going to take a next step to grow gospel fluent, which next step would you take? Maybe it's just be back here next week as we start a brand new series about how to read the Bible called Well Versed. Maybe that's your next step. Maybe your next step is to head to the Next Steps wall and join a team, because as you get involved in personal ministry, it's a part of becoming gospel fluent. Maybe you need to get onto the app and look at groups and decide, I'm going to get into a community where the gospel is lived out, because when you do, it is part of becoming gospel fluent. Or maybe you need to decide, you know what, I'm going to do some things when no one's watching. I'm going to start praying when no one's watching. I'm going to read when no one's watching. I'm going to jump online and set up auto give, because what I want to do is grow gospel fluent through private devotion. Guys, those 4 next steps will help you grow gospel fluent, where you are no longer speaking gospel-ish because you are fluent in the gospel. So at the end of this series, maybe this is just the beginning of you unlearning decades of gospel-ish. And we hope now you understand more of what the gospel actually is. And when I was here weeks ago, I gave it to you in 5 ways. I want to go back to those. The gospel is God created, and because he created, he has the right to command. God created, God commanded. We rebelled against his good and loving commands. He sent Jesus to rescue us. God created, God commanded, we rebelled, God rescues, and now we get to respond. That's what the gospel is. Gospel-ish is always this. You should be earning more from God, and because of your religious earning, God owes you. Whenever you come across something like that, now you know that is ish. That is not the gospel. There is nothing we could do to earn salvation. Jesus has earned it for us. That's what the gospel is. And it's my hope now, after the last few weeks that we've had together, that you would abandon gospel-ish to embrace what the gospel really is. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to do one more thing in our service this morning. Would you pray with me? God, we've all been in those moments where we see a picture on a screen or we hear somebody up on a stage and guilt sets in because we think we should be doing more. And we think if we really loved you, we would be doing more. And God, I just pray now that guilt is something we can process well because we know what the gospel actually is. And Jesus, I thank you that you allow us to enjoy good things in our lives. And you allow us to use wealth in our lives to serve people, to make a difference. And I pray today as we finish this series, as we wrap up this series, that we would now know what the gospel is. Because it's not the prosperity gospel, and it's not the positivity gospel, and it's not the entitlement gospel, and it's not the poverty gospel. It's that you, Jesus, were rich, and you laid aside your privilege to serve us so that we can be in relationship with the God who made us. Nothing left to earn, nothing we have to do. God, we just trust you today. And that's what the gospel invites us to do. Would you help us take our next step, whatever that next step might be, to pursue gospel fluency? It's in your name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.